I feel like I f***ed that whole... Once I f***ed up, then it's just like...
Start over. I think you need a drink.
Yeah? Hi, my name's Clayton Crowley, and I made a basketball video. I made a series of basketball videos making the case for the greatest NBA team of all time. That series is now done, so I'm going to answer some questions about it. The first question is actually many questions, and it is, why didn't this team make the series? And the three big teams that didn't make the series that people asked a lot about were the 1983 76ers, the 2014 Spurs, and the 2013 Heat. So let's take them one by one. First, the 2013 Heat. You have to understand that when I made the list of teams that I was going to include in this series, I had a list of these, I had the 8 that I did, these 3, and probably 2 or 3 more. Obviously, you have to include Bird's best team, Jordan's best Bulls team, Magic's best Laker team, stuff like that. But then once you start getting into some of the more underrated, underappreciated, or kind of time-forgotten teams, you have to start picking nits and splitting hairs. So for the 13 Heat, they won, 27 games in a row, which was the second longest win streak ever. They finished with like 66 to 68 wins, something like that. And then made it to the finals and obviously won the finals in one of like the all-time classic finals performances. Final series, I should say. And that's all great. And so we remember that as being LeBron at his absolute apex, where he shot like 40% from 3 and like 60% from the field. And Dwayne Wade was still great, and Chris Bosh was like a killer in the playoffs where he was like hitting clutch shots and making big rebounds, and Ray Allen obviously saved the day. But the crux of that video, and it's something that I would have had to spend a lot of time explaining away, how could the greatest team of all time have been one shot with 5 seconds left in a do-or-die game away from losing the series, basically? And so I would have had to spend a lot of time explaining that away, and I just felt like if you want to base it off of the win streak, well, then the 72 Lakers have a better win streak and a better record and had an easier time in the playoffs dealing with teams that were really, really good. Now, the argument for that Heat team would be that the Spurs they were competing against weren't just a normal run-of-the-mill average finals matchup. Like, when the 2014 Spurs won, they laid a claim as the greatest team of all time. So you could make the argument that, like, that Spurs team is a historically great opponent. I just couldn't get myself around to that. There were other teams that I wanted to do more than the Heat, and I just felt like explaining it away just felt like too much of a task when I could just do other teams that kind of had a little more ironclad arguments. For the Spurs, they got taken to 7 games in the first round against the Dallas Mavericks, which is not good. When you're the 1 seed and the 8 seed takes you to 7 and you're the greatest team of all time, that's a little bit more of a scare than you'd want there to be. I totally understand the reasoning why this team deserves to be on this list, and that is, for 4 games in the finals, there's never been a team play better basketball. Ever, in any series, ever. The 14 Spurs played the best basketball that has ever been played for 4 games in that finals. The Spurs have the case that, okay, they might not be the best wire-to-wire. Yeah, they might not have had the best playoff run as a whole, but in one series, when they're playing at their absolute best, this team plays the best basketball of any team ever. I totally understand the argument why, but it feels like, explaining the 0-1 Lakers, who had an underwhelming regular season, were so dominant in the playoffs. And that feels like a large enough sample size of a time frame of dominance that it kind of does offset that. The Spurs were better in the regular season than the 0-1 Lakers were, but their dominant stretch was only that finals series, which just felt like a little too narrow of a window of dominance to justify it. For me, I understand that they deserve to be there. I understand if you think that I'm crazy and silly for not doing it, and I understand if you just wanted me to do it because you wanted to hear me talk about the 14 Spurs. Me too. I wanted to talk about them, but I already had the 8 other teams, and I couldn't bring myself to do 9, 10, or 11 teams. And for the 83 Sixers, I'm gonna level with you. I ultimately had to pick the teams that had respectable enough cases that could be defended, and that I was also interested in making the case for. It ultimately came down to 3 teams for the last 2 spots. The 71 Bucks, the 72 Lakers, and the 83 Sixers. In retrospect, would I have enjoyed making the case for the 83 Sixers more than the 71 Bucks? Yeah. I stand by on my, theoretical hierarchy of teams. I would probably still have the Bucks ahead of those Sixers, but the decision that I made was based off of what I was interested in doing, and I think I would have enjoyed the Sixers a lot more. So, am I going to do the 83 Sixers? No. I'm not. You just have to live with me saying, my bad. The other big question, and it's kind of a two-part thing that I want to talk about, but the big question is, what's next? What am I going to do next? Is it going to be another series, one-off videos? What are they? And it leads me into another question that somebody asked that I'm going to put on the screen here, which says, hey Clayton, would you like to take a break from the Making the Case series? And the answer to that question is yeah. The really hard thing about doing this series, well, I should say the hard thing about doing series in general, as I've done them so far, is that they are very large undertakings. Making a 20 to 30 minute video about anything is hard. It takes a lot of time and effort to make. And then trying to make it good takes time. And you are all very receptive to that and supportive of that and encouraging, and I can't thank you enough for that. But the dopamine levels in my brain of putting out a video when it only happens every month or every 6 weeks or whatever, that worry of and feeling of being behind really starts to take its toll. And there's also a part of it where it's like, I decided to make this series in February, and now we're in November, and finishing the Warriors case was tough because it's like, man, I'm just kind of burnt out from making these big, long series. So yes, I would like to take a break from making the case. Just like I did last time, where I had an intervening couple of months where I just made videos about what I wanted to make. And those weren't ultimately that fulfilling for their own reasons. But hopefully this time I have a big list of ideas. I have a whiteboard with a whole bunch of stuff written on it of players that are going to be one-offs and hopefully funny and creative, ideas for videos, and just stuff that's hopefully shorter and that I can get on more of a schedule and make that's kind of exercising a different creative bone in my body, and that can hopefully establish a little bit sense of regularity between uploads and a little bit more of a schedule. I'm not going to lay down what that is right now because I don't know what it is, but I'd like to get to that place. What I'm trying to say is, yes, I'm a little tired of making the case. It's burnt me out a little bit, and so I would like to try to make a couple other videos that are maybe a little bit shorter, maybe a little bit outside the realm of just the NBA and the greatest players of all time. Maybe a little football, maybe a little general sports stuff. That's the plan. That's where we're going to go. I hope that you enjoyed the series. I'm going to hopefully make another one someday, but it's not going to be the focus right now. I'm going to take a break and make stuff that's a little bit different. Still to the same standard, still to the same attitude and with the same tone that I hope that you have liked and enjoyed and are here for, but a little different nonetheless. With those things out of the way, we can move on to something more important, like the sponsor of today's video. And the sponsor of today's video is Manscaped. You've been around and you know what's up. Manscaped is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. They've got precision-engineered tools for your family jewels, baby. They just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0, which they were kind enough to send me as part of their Perfect Package 4.0. Let's talk about this trimmer. It is a game changer. It's got a 4000K LED spotlight to help you see hairs you otherwise might have missed, and the advanced skin-safe technology is no joke. After using other razors and trimmers, it was legitimately a little surprising to see how forgiving the lawnmower is to your bits. It helps reduce nicks, ingrown hairs, and grooming accidents, and leaves your balls and such looking ready for prime time. And you want to know what? If you're thinking about trying Manscaped for yourself, you can use my promo code, Clayton, at manscaped.com during checkout to save 20% off your order and get free worldwide shipping. That's manscaped.com, promo code Clayton during checkout for 20% off and free shipping. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. Your balls will thank you. Now that we've talked about balls, on to the questions. Internal Cacophony says, the thing that jumps out to me the most is a lack of modern teams. The Spurs arguably had a strong dynasty in the late 90s, early aughts, and even 2010s, but then again, they weren't overwhelming. What changes in league history led to this sort of decline in dynasties? I think that's actually a little bit of a misconception. When you look at the NBA history specifically, I think a lot of people would point to the 80s, kind of between 1980 and 1992, let's say. There seems to be a lot of dynasties, back-to-back championships by the Pistons and the Lakers and the blah, blah, blah. And that seems to be the standard that the rest of league history is compared to, rather than the outlier as the golden age that it was. I just think it's kind of a misconception that there's no dynasties anymore. We just had the Warriors, who we were all pretty sure were going to win like 8 straight championships. And that was 4 years ago. So I don't think that there's necessarily a decline in dynasties. The thing that makes dynasties unique is that they're rare. So if it's been a while since we've had one, it's because that's the nature of dynasties. My good friend Mason asks, what are some of the daily struggles you face being the hottest basketball YouTuber of our generation? Seriously, how do you look that good? First of all, Mason, I have to correct you on something. I am not the hottest basketball YouTuber of our generation. I'm the hottest basketball YouTuber of all time. To answer your question, though, how do I look this good? I look in the mirror and I say, how do I look today? How would I make myself look if I was trying to impress Mason? And then I do that. So I hope it's working. How's it going, John asks, would you ever collaborate with Video Game Donkey and play like NBA Jam or NBA Street? That would probably make me piss and cry. Yeah. I think this is just because I've made like a couple Donkey quotes in my videos or on Twitter. I have no reason to believe he knows that I exist or would have any interest in doing anything with me ever. But, of course, I would like to do that. I love Donkey. I think he makes great content. If he wants to play NBA Jam and he wants to get that ass dunked on, then, he knows where to find me. Jake says, if Steph was the pinnacle of the 2020s three-point shooting trend, what will be the 2020s trend and who is leading it? It's going to be positionless basketball. It's going to be guys like Jokic who are 7 feet tall and also the best passer on their team. It's going to be like Giannis. It's going to be like Giannis who plays like a center, but he runs the court like a forward. And there's just no way to stop him. There's no matchup that you can put on him that's really going to slow him down. Judging players by the traditional, historical skills of their position, I think that's going to slowly go away over time. Hypocrite's Son says, what is your end goal as a content creator? Are you sticking with YouTube? Would you like to get picked up by a network or what? I could 100% see you as an executive producer on some 30-30 type beat. Keep up the good work. Excited to see what's next. Thank you very much, sir. It's a really weird question to answer. First of all, I don't want to be on YouTube forever because you can't be on YouTube forever. There's a shelf life for the internet. I should say there's a shelf life for YouTube specifically. The people you were watching 3 years ago are probably not the same people you're watching now. And yeah, it would be great to move on to move to a bigger thing. This is the stuff that I love. I love doing this. This is my passion. It feels a little presumptive to be like, I want to, be the head of 30 for 30 or do something like that. But, dream job on my dream board, it's probably something like that, doing some documentary stuff or the kind of stuff I'm doing with more resources, just being able to raise the scale and really go nuts with it, which I don't think is something that's going to be ultimately possible on YouTube. Mizzou and Celtics fan asks, what do you think was Bill Russell's greatest Celtics team? 1965. Look it up. The Bonus, hosted by Tristan Brown, with whom I had a lovely conversation about basketball, asks, who's the best lefty ever? Well, it's a little guy who won a couple championships, 11 of them actually, and his name was Bill Russell. So I'm going to have to go with Bill Russell. Dreed asks, what team do you think has had the most surprising start to this season? And do you think they will be able to continue it for the rest of the season? I made a video in January talking about the death of the Warriors dynasty, and I'm pretty sure they have the best record in the West right now. So I'm gonna have to go with the Warriors, and they're getting Klay Thompson back. So yeah, I'm pretty sure they're gonna contend, and I'm pretty sure that I was wrong. Pally Forever asks, in your mind, what is the legacy of the 2013 Heat? I truly feel that they were a very influential and entertaining basketball team. Would you consider making a one-off video on them? Yes, I would, and I will save my thoughts for that one-off someday. Big Bird asks, what is your perspective on the United States' current geopolitical state? Do you believe reconciliation is possible, or is civil war unavoidable? Will we ever move past the second most decisive decade in American history, or will this chaos throw the whole world into abandon? And then he asks, oh damn, this is supposed to be about basketball. Who's your favorite team this year? I'm a secret kind of fair weather Clippers fan. My good friend Zach asks, who would you draft first if you were an NBA scout scouting East High from High School Musical? Troy Bolton or Chad Danforth? I have to admit something, which is I have never in my life seen High School Musical. So I don't know how to answer. Who should I draft? Who's a better basketball player, Troy Bolton or Chad Danforth?
Chad.
Okay, I'm drafting Chad Danforth on the advice of my counsel. Eric asks, what team is your favorite team of all time? If you have one, not one you think is the best, but just one from a specific year that you love. This is where I go back on everything I said about the 2014 Spurs, because they were probably my favorite team of all time. I love Tim Duncan. He is maybe my favorite basketball player of all time, so there's a little bit of bias when the fact that I made the case for him as the greatest of all time. But that Spurs team, after suffering that defeat against the Heat, and I started watching basketball rooting against LeBron and rooting against the Heat, and so for them to have that defeat and then come back and just play exquisite basketball was so much fun, and it was vindicating, and it was just fantastic. It was awesome, and it just like deepened this love of basketball. So probably the 2014 Spurs. Jordan says, hey Clayton, if the 73-9 Warriors would have won the finals, would they have made the list over the Kevin Durant team? It's an interesting thought experiment, because if they had won that championship, Kevin Durant has said that he wouldn't have joined the Warriors. But yeah, if the 73-9 Warriors had won the championship over LeBron James and the Cavs, they have a pretty solid case as the greatest team of all time. Music and Magic 909 asks, what do you struggle with as a creator? More specifically, the Clayton polish takes time and effort, and we are all appreciative of it, but that hard work only pays off if it's a video people actually watch. Do you feel disappointed that there are videos you'd like to make, but that wouldn't be worth the investment? Aside from that and the time and work it takes to create, what do you struggle with in this YouTube endeavor? That is a very thoughtful, kind question. Gosh, what do I struggle with the most? I think I tie a certain amount of my own self-worth into the reception of my videos, because they do take a lot of time and effort, and I try to make them as good as possible. That time and effort is like putting a part of yourself into it. And so you want people to watch it and enjoy it. And I've been lucky enough that most of the stuff I've put out there has gotten really good feedback. But when there's some things that don't do as well as others, and there's things that I really enjoyed making, that I feel like I put a whole lot of myself into, then it does get hard to... Then it is hard. I think another thing that's really hard, balancing what I like to do and what YouTube likes, is I like to do longer stuff, and I like to go in depth and take my time with it and make it really good. And YouTube likes more regular things. With this next round of things that I want to make, I want to find that middle ground where it's just like, okay, it's something that's a little bit more geared towards YouTube wanting more regular content, but also creative stuff that I enjoy making. Thank you very much for that question. Oh, here we go. Pepe asks, or Pepe's Pizzeria, sorry, says, in your intro for the greatest team of all time series, you include the line with apologies to Bill and Wilt, but Wilt features prominently in the 72 Lakers video. I've been wondering about the inconsistency. Was it left over from a point where you didn't intend on making the Lakers video? Was there a team you had originally planned that you didn't make the cut? I knew the teams I was going to make from the start, and I organized the clips at the beginning of the series around that list. What I really meant by, with apologies to Bill and Wilt, was specifically excluding the 1967 76ers and the 65 Celtics. I just was not going to try to make the argument that a team from the 60s would be better than a team from today or the Michael Jordan Bulls or whatever. They might have the reputation and the achieved level of greatness that makes them worth talking about in that context, but I just wanted to talk about teams that were a little more easily comparable. And so, yeah, Wilt was on that Lakers team and he was a big part of it and he won the Finals MVP, but I was really more talking about the era of basketball where Bill and Wilt were the two giants and icons of the sport and just ruled over the entire landscape. I know it was a little inconsistent and a little confusing, and that's my bad. for wording it that way. But the real reason I included it was because I didn't want to talk about the 65 Celtics or the 67 Sixers. So there you go. Ultra asks, which team was the easiest to make a case for? I mean, the 96 Bulls, because it's like you have Michael Jordan, you have Scottie Pippen, you have the sixth man, you have Phil Jackson, and they have the best record of a champion ever. And also, the narrative was like surprisingly fun. Michael Jordan had been gone, and they didn't win championships, and he comes back, and there's all these questions. They had just been beaten by the Magic, and then they go on a tear and just like, you can't even put into words like what they did, where it's like, we didn't just win the championship, we didn't have an all-time great team, we had the all-time great team. Super impressive, and just really easy to talk about, and just be like, boing, 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 greatest team. Shane asks, do you think we should view a team's greatness based on longevity as well? Kind of like how we look at how good a player is for X number of years. Rosters do change a lot, but like some teams had great teams for ages, and it should add to their case. I definitely think so. Which is the hard part of making the case for a specific single season team. You know, the Lakers with Kobe and Shaq, when they won 3 years in a row, that's a more impressive thing than just a one-off, like let's say the 71 Bucks. So yeah, maybe it should add to that, to where you're not talking about a single specific calendar year. You can almost talk about it in terms of like iteration of a team. You know what I mean? Felix asks, how different was the research for these videos compared to the players? Were they tougher or took more time or way more or less fun? Did you learn anything new after said research? Love the content, Duncan Robinson, you the go. Thank you, Felix. And this gets at to why this series was particularly draining. And it's something that I figured out pretty early on, was that the process of making these videos was going to be harder to tell a narrative, because the narrative of all these great teams is the same, pretty much. You have a great team with a great roster, they kick a bunch of ass, and then they win the championship. The arc is about the exact same for everybody. Which is why it was really fun to do a team like the 72 Lakers or the 89 Pistons, because there's a little bit more to that. There's a little bit more to that narrative than a team like the 17 Warriors or the 71 Bucks, where it's just like, we were great, we kicked a bunch of ass, and we won the championship. That was the hardest part, finding a way to make videos feel distinct and narratively fulfilling when they all follow the same trajectory. So that was the hard part. That was definitely the hardest part. Matthew asks, can you make a totally unbiased series about the best NBA YouTube series? Yeah, we'll do it right now. The best YouTube series is Making the Case. And that's the end of the series.
Sassy.
Mm-hmm. Jake asks, are you ever going to do a top 10 players of all time video? I don't know if you know this, but I made a series. It's not a top 10, but it's kind of a top 8. So check that out. Because no. Joe asks a really interesting question. Which of the teams on your list benefited most from their coach? In other words, which team wouldn't be on this list if they had an average coach at the helm? That's an interesting question. But honestly, the 0-1 Lakers. I think if Phil Jackson hadn't been there, if he hadn't been a neutralizing, calming presence, if he hadn't been able to reach both stars and kind of help foster this cohesion, I think that team very much would have self-imploded, as it did the next, like, a couple years later. I think Phil Jackson squeezed every bit of talent out, not talent, every bit of success out of those Lakers teams that they possibly could have had, because they would have just been at each other's throats if David Blatt had been their coach. Sahil asks, what is your top 75? I appreciate this question, Sahil. I think you are overestimating my ability to sit in front of this camera just a little bit. So Good Gaming asks, how are you, Clayton? I'm pretty good, So Good Gaming. Thank you very much for asking. Shinri says, show us your hairline. It's not too bad. I mean, I think I have a pretty large forehead now that I'm looking at it in the camera. And it's not too bad. The hairline's the way it's always been. I think I just have a naturally large forehead. So I hope that is what you wanted. Death Killer asks, why no Kobe Bryant? I think this is a serious question, but it almost feels like an inside joke meme, because it's a question I get all the time. And it's like, I have a video. I have like 20 videos on my channel, and one of them is answering the question why Kobe Bryant wasn't in that series. So at this point, getting asked why no Kobe Bryant feels like a meme. E.D. Zigich asks, are you white? I think so. Now moving on to Patreon to wrap us up some very good questions. Yoshi says, thanks for the incredibly informative series. Anything for you, Yoshi. In terms of teams that missed the cut for you, I found myself pondering those who accomplished everything short of a championship. Numerous squads that can boast sublime cohesion, well-rounded play on both ends, stretches of dominance, lofty peaks, legendary coaching, stacked rosters that ultimately couldn't quite get it done. As a result, I find those teams get historically neglected when talking about 5-on-5 basketball. What are some ringless teams that stand out to you the most? I mean, I think the most recent example of the 2016 Warriors is like, if they had won that championship, they would be maybe not universally, but like pretty universally the greatest team of all time. I think that people think a lot about the Jazz, the fact that they had to go up against the Bulls back-to-back years and that it was kind of close both years as like an all-time great team. I'm not convinced that those Jazz teams were that great, but I know that they won the following year, but it still irks me that the 88 Pistons didn't win that championship because of how insane Isaiah Thomas's performance was and the fact that that team just was better than the Lakers, but Isaiah got hurt. I don't know, those teams. Tony asks, what is, in your own real opinion, your pick for the best team? My own personal choice is the 2017 Warriors. I just don't see how someone can match that scoring potential over a full series. It's really 3 teams for me. It's the 86 Celtics, the 96 Bulls, and the 17 Warriors. Some of these teams would beat other teams, like the way they match up. That's just the way that matchups work, right? The 89 Pistons would match up really well with the 86 Celtics. Like, the matchup stuff is really weird, and it's a really hard way to judge this stuff because there's never going to be a team that's like, I would beat every other team, because the strength of your team is no team's perfect. I think if I'm going to go with a team, it's going to be a team that ruined the sport of basketball because they were too goddamn good at it. So I think, tentatively, I'm going to agree and to say the 2017 Warriors. Steven asks, what is your favorite NBA what-if scenario? Maybe a video about an intriguing alternate universe? Thank you for your work. The way you talk about basketball is the way I wish I could talk about football. Thank you very much, Steven. Favorite NBA what-if? You know, injuries always become a factor. Bill Walton. Doing the 86 Celtics thing, going back and... I mean, I knew about Bill Walton, but going back and reading some of the stuff and the stuff that was written about him at the time as a UCLA Bruin and when he came into the NBA and stuff about him as a Trailblazer, he was going to be the rival to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the next, 7 or 8 years. And his feet just got hurt. If he wasn't the best college basketball player of all time, which is Kareem, he's the second best college basketball player of all time. Then he comes into the NBA, wins a championship, wins an MVP a year where he misses a third of the season. This guy was going to be Pantheon, Mount Rushmore kind of guy. And instead you only end up with, one of the greatest college basketball players of all time and a champion and an MVP. So we really got robbed of something special with Bill Walton. So he's going to be my pick for my greatest what if. We're going to wrap up with Matthew, who asks 2 questions. Question 1, tell us the moment you knew you had fallen in love with basketball. I think I've told this story before, but I want to tell it again because I just find it interesting and we're just here talking. I got into basketball and sports kind of late in life as far as people who get into sports. It wasn't until I was in high school where I was maybe 15 or 16. I mean, I'd never really cared about sports. I played baseball, I did track, I did swim team and stuff like that, but I never really cared about team sports or watching it on TV, least of all basketball. And I had a friend in high school who wanted me to come over and watch a basketball game. And it was in the 2013 Eastern Conference Finals with the Heat and the the Pacers. I don't know what game it was, and I don't know what it was about it, but it felt so cool. And about hating LeBron and rooting for the Pacers and how Paul George was exploding and blossoming. Something about it just got me, just hooked me. And I didn't know anything about basketball other than LeBron used to play in Cleveland, but now he's in Miami and I guess everybody hates him, so I hate him too. And then I watched the finals, and my friend who got me into this was a Spurs fan, and so he gave me the whole history of the Spurs and he got me into the, all that stuff. And so when Ray Allen hit that shot in Game 6, it wasn't like I was a Spurs fan who all of a sudden now I'm heartbroken that the Spurs had lost. It was just the feeling of having seen something incredible and historic happen that just felt magical. And so that became the obsession. Basketball became an obsession where it just like, all of it just felt interesting and special. And I just cared about it. And I don't know why. I still don't know why. But that shot, that was when it's like, oh, I love this. Matthew's second question is, what's the most important thing you've learned about basketball from making these series, and what's the most important thing you've learned about yourself? Those are big questions, and I really appreciate you asking them because they're very thoughtful and kind. The most important thing I learned about basketball from these series is that greatness can come in any form, at any time, and from wherever. It doesn't matter if it was if it was way back in the day, if it's now, which I think a lot of people have a hard time appreciating its greatness when it's happening right now. It is so welcoming to different styles and different types of players. That's one of my favorite things, and it's something I've gotten a greater appreciation for having done this series. These series, I should say. And the most important thing I've learned about myself, I think I learned that I like to tell stories. And maybe that was part of the problem with doing this about teams. Going forward, I want to try to put more importance on kind of listening to that part that enjoys telling a story and crafting a narrative or whatever. Because it is my favorite thing. Doing the research and finding out what happened and finding out what that story is or should be is awesome. That's my favorite thing. I think that's about it. I'm out of drink. I'm out of questions. And that's my time. Thank you for watching this series. Thank you for watching my videos. I am so appreciative of the fact that you are an audience that is funny and supportive, and that you trust me enough to give me the time it takes to make these videos because you trust that it will be worth it in the end. If it was any other way, I don't think I'd be able to do this. And so I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next thing.